Let's talk about something juicy. What makes a president go down in history as one of the worst? Was it scandals that made headlines for all the wrong reasons? Was it terrible decisions that left the country in shambles? Or was it just plain bad timing, like showing up to a party nobody wanted to attend? Whatever it was, some presidents just didn't get it right, and today, we're diving into their stories. Get ready, because this is going to be a wild ride through some of the most infamous moments in U.S. history. Now, before we get into it, let's set the stage. This isn't just about bashing presidents for fun, though, let's be honest, it's a little fun. It's about understanding what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how their actions, or lack of actions, shaped the nation. We're talking about leaders who dropped the ball in big ways. Whether it was ignoring crises, making decisions that divided the country, or getting caught up in scandals that made them the laughingstock of history. So buckle up, because we're about to explore the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Oval Office. But hey, history isn't just about what I think, it's about what you think too. So, while we're going through this list, I want you to keep one question in mind. Who do you think was the worst president in U.S. history? Was it someone we're about to talk about, or is there someone else who comes to mind? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading them, and who knows, maybe we'll even do a follow-up video based on your picks. Let's get this conversation started. Okay, so before we start naming names, let's talk about what actually makes a president bad. Because, let's be real, not every president is going to be a Lincoln or a Washington. Some are just, well, not great. But what exactly puts them in the worst category? Here's the deal. We're looking at a few key factors. First, there's poor leadership. Did they fail to step up when the country needed them most? Did they make decisions that left everyone scratching their heads? Then there's unpopular policies, the kind that made people say, wait, you're doing what? And of course, we can't forget corruption. Nothing tanks a legacy faster than getting caught with your hand in the cookie jar. But it's not just about what they did, it's about the impact they had. Did their actions hurt the economy? Damage foreign relations? Divide the country on social issues? These are the things that can turn a presidency from meh to oh no, what were they thinking? Now, here's where it gets interesting. Not everyone agrees on who the worst presidents are. Historians might point to one thing, while the public remembers something completely different. Take, for example, a president like Andrew Johnson. Historians often rank him as one of the worst because of his disastrous handling of Reconstruction after the Civil War. But if you asked someone in the 1860s, they might have had a different opinion, especially if they agreed with his policies. And then there are presidents like Richard Nixon. Sure, Watergate was a huge deal, and it led to his resignation, but he also had some major wins in foreign policy. So, is he the worst? Depends on who you ask. The point is, judging a president isn't always black and white. Some are universally criticized, while others are more controversial, with supporters and detractors on both sides. And that's what makes this topic so fascinating. It's not just about facts and figures, it's about perspective. Let's start with James Buchanan, the 15th president, often dubbed one of the worst. Why? Because his presidency was a masterclass in how not to handle a crisis. He took office in 1857 as tensions over slavery pushed the nation toward civil war. Instead of leading, Buchanan did nothing. He supported the Dred Scott decision, which denied rights to enslaved people, angering the North. Meanwhile, he ignored southern states threatening to secede, basically saying, "Not my problem." Oh, and let's not forget the Panic of 1857, an economic crisis he failed to address. So he ignored both a moral disaster and an economic one. The result? His inaction helped pave the way for the Civil War. Historians and even his contemporaries agreed. Buchanan left the country worse than he found it. One senator bluntly said he failed utterly when the nation needed leadership most. So, when we talk about America's worst presidents, Buchanan is always in the conversation. His legacy? A president who didn't just fail, he failed when the stakes were highest. Imagine being the captain of a ship in a storm and just walking away. That's Buchanan, and that's why he's remembered as one of the worst. Andrew Johnson, the 17th president, who took office after Lincoln's assassination. If you thought Buchanan was bad, Johnson gives him a run for his money. His presidency was defined by his fierce opposition to Reconstruction and his clashes with Congress. Basically, he fought against progress at every turn. Johnson, a Southern Democrat, was supposed to help rebuild the nation after the Civil War. Instead, he actively undermined efforts to secure rights for freed slaves. He vetoed key legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the Freedmen's Bureau Bill, which were designed to protect African Americans. When Congress overrode his vetoes, Johnson openly defied them, even encouraging Southern states to pass black codes, laws that restricted the freedoms of formerly enslaved people. His stubbornness led to a historic first. Johnson became the first U.S. president to be impeached. The final straw was his violation of the Tenure of Office Act, but really it was the culmination of his constant battles with Congress and his refusal to support Reconstruction. Though he narrowly avoided removal from office, his presidency left a lasting stain. Johnson's impact? He set back civil rights for decades. By siding with former Confederates and opposing equality, he allowed systemic racism to take root in the South. Historians often rank him as one of the worst presidents for his failure to unite the nation and his role in perpetuating inequality. In short, Johnson didn't just fail to lead, he actively worked against progress, leaving a legacy of division and injustice. Warren G. Harding, the 29th president, whose time in office is synonymous with one word: scandal. Harding campaigned on a promise of a return to normalcy after World War I, but his presidency was anything but normal. Instead, it became a poster child for corruption and cronyism. The biggest stain on his legacy? The Teapot Dome scandal. Here's the deal. Harding's Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, secretly leased federal oil reserves to private companies in exchange for bribes. It was one of the biggest political scandals in U.S. history, and it happened right under Harding's nose. But that wasn't all. His administration was riddled with corruption. Cabinet members were caught up in fraud, bribery, and even bootlegging during Prohibition. Harding himself wasn't directly implicated in most of these scandals, but his poor judgment in appointing shady characters to key positions earned him a reputation for being, well, clueless. He once famously said, "I have no trouble with my enemies, but my friends, they're the ones that keep me walking the floor at night." Spoiler, he wasn't wrong. The impact? Harding's presidency is often seen as one of the most corrupt in U.S. history. His administration's scandals eroded public trust in the government and left a lasting stain on his legacy. While he died in office before the full extent of the corruption came to light, his name is forever tied to an era of greed and mismanagement. In short, Harding's presidency is a cautionary tale of what happens when leadership fails to hold the line on integrity. Next up is Herbert Hoover, the 31st president, who took office in 1929, just in time for the stock market to crash and plunge the nation into the Great Depression. Talk about bad timing. But here's the thing. It wasn't just timing that made Hoover's presidency a disaster. It was his response. Hoover, an accomplished engineer and self-made millionaire, was seen as a brilliant problem solver. But when the economy collapsed, his solutions fell flat. He believed in limited government intervention, thinking the economy would fix itself. Spoiler, it didn't. He pushed for voluntary measures, asking businesses not to cut wages and charities to help, but this hands-off approach left millions of Americans struggling. What really hurt Hoover's reputation, though, was his perceived lack of empathy. While people were standing in breadlines and living in shantytowns called Hoovervilles, he seemed out of touch. His infamous line, "Prosperity is just around the corner," felt like a slap in the face to those suffering. The impact? Hoover's policies and tone-deaf leadership are often blamed for worsening the Great Depression. By the time he left office in 1933, unemployment had skyrocketed to 25%, and public trust in the government was shattered. While he wasn't solely responsible for the crisis, his failure to respond effectively cemented his legacy as one of America's worst presidents. In the end, Hoover's presidency is a stark reminder that leadership isn't just about ideas. It's about action and empathy when people need it most. Now, let's talk about Richard Nixon, the 37th president, whose name is practically synonymous with scandal. Nixon was a complex figure. he had major wins, like opening diplomatic relations with China and signing the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. But all of that is overshadowed by one word: Watergate. Here's the deal. In 1972, operatives linked to Nixon's re-election campaign broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex to plant bugs and steal documents. When the break-in was uncovered, Nixon didn't come clean. Instead, he orchestrated a massive cover-up, using the power of the presidency to obstruct the investigation. The scandal unraveled over 2 years, revealing a web of lies, illegal wiretaps, and abuse of power. The impact? Watergate became the biggest political scandal in U.S. history, leading to Nixon's resignation in 1974, the first and only president to do so. His famous line, "I am not a crook," became a punchline, and his legacy was forever tarnished. But Watergate didn't just ruin Nixon's reputation, it shattered public trust in the presidency and American politics as a whole. It led to widespread cynicism about government and inspired reforms to increase transparency. Even today, Gate is tacked onto every new scandal, a testament to how deeply Watergate changed the political landscape. Nixon's presidency is a cautionary tale of how power, when unchecked, can lead to downfall, and how one scandal can define a legacy. Next up is Franklin Pierce, the 14th president, who often flies under the radar. But don't let that fool you. His presidency was a disaster, especially when it came to the issue of slavery. Pierce, a Northern Democrat with Southern sympathies, took office in 1853, and his policies only deepened the divide between the North and the South. The biggest blunder? His support for the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. This law allowed new territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, effectively overturning the Missouri Compromise, which had kept the peace for decades. The result? Chaos. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers flooded into Kansas, leading to violent clashes that earned the territory the nickname Bleeding Kansas. Pierce's handling of the crisis was weak and indecisive, further inflaming tensions. But it wasn't just Kansas. Pierce also supported the Ostend Manifesto, a secret plan to buy Cuba from Spain, and if Spain refused, to take it by force. Why? To expand slavery into the Caribbean. The plan was leaked, causing outrage and making Pierce look like a puppet for pro-slavery interests. The impact? Pierce's policies pushed the nation closer to civil war. By siding with pro-slavery forces and failing to address the growing divide, he became a symbol of failed leadership. Historians often rank him as one of the worst presidents for his role in escalating the conflict that would tear the nation apart. In short, Pierce didn't just fail to lead. He helped set the stage for one of the darkest chapters in American history. Finally, we have to talk about Donald Trump, the 45th president, and perhaps the most polarizing figure in modern American history. Love him or hate him, there's no denying that his presidency was a roller coaster of controversies, scandals, and unprecedented moments. Trump's time in office is defined by his polarizing policies and rhetoric. From the travel ban targeting predominantly Muslim countries to the controversial family separation policy at the U.S.-Mexico border, his actions sparked nationwide protests and fierce debates. His America First agenda reshaped foreign policy, pulling out of international agreements like the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran nuclear deal, while his tax cuts and deregulation pleased his base but drew criticism for favoring the wealthy. Then there were the impeachment trials. Yes, trials plural. Trump became the first president in U.S. history to be impeached twice. The first, in 2019, was for pressuring Ukraine to investigate a political rival. The second, in 2021, came after the Capitol riot, when he was accused of inciting an insurrection. While he was acquitted both times, the impeachments left a lasting stain on his presidency. The impact? Trump's presidency deepened the political and cultural divides in America. His confrontational style and rejection of norms reshaped the Republican Party and left the country more polarized than ever. Whether you see him as a disruptor or a danger, one thing's clear: Donald Trump's legacy is as divisive as his presidency. Love him or loathe him, he changed the game, for better or worse. Before we wrap up, let's give a quick shout out to a few presidents who didn't quite make the worst list, but still have their fair share of critics. These guys might not be as infamous as Buchanan or Nixon, but they definitely left some questionable marks on history. First up, John Tyler, the 10th president, known as His Excellency because he was the first VP to take over after a president's death. Tyler was so unpopular that his own party kicked him out. He vetoed key Whig legislation, alienating Congress, and later sided with the Confederacy during the Civil War. Yeah, not a great look. Then there's Millard Fillmore, the 13th president. He signed the Compromise of 1850, which included the Fugitive Slave Act, forcing Northerners to return escaped slaves to the South. Spoiler, it didn't exactly make him popular in the North. And let's not forget George W. Bush, the 43rd president. While some praise his response to 9/11, his presidency is also remembered for the controversial Iraq War, the handling of Hurricane Katrina, and the 2008 financial crisis. Love him or hate him, his legacy is still hotly debated. These presidents might not top the worst list, but they're proof that even the ones who fly under the radar can leave a complicated legacy. History isn't always black and white. Sometimes it's just messy. Alright, so we've talked about some of America's worst presidents, what they did wrong, how they failed, and the messes they left behind. But why does this matter? Why should we care about leaders who, let's be honest, didn't exactly cover themselves in glory? Here's the thing. These presidents remind us that leadership matters. The decisions made in the Oval Office don't just affect the people in power, they ripple out and shape the lives of millions. Whether it's Buchanan's inaction before the Civil War, Hoover's hands-off approach during the Great Depression, or Nixon's abuse of power in Watergate, these failures had real, lasting consequences. But there's a silver lining here. These presidencies aren't just cautionary tales. They're lessons. They show us what happens when leaders lack vision, empathy, or accountability. They remind us that the job of a president isn't just to manage the day-to-day, but to steer the country through crises with integrity and courage. And honestly, that's a lesson we can all take to heart, whether we're in politics or not. Now let's bring this into the present. We're living in an era of intense political polarization, where trust in government is shaky and the stakes feel higher than ever. Sound familiar? It's not so different from the divisions we saw before the Civil War, or the cynicism that followed Watergate. Understanding these presidencies helps us reflect on what we expect from our leaders and what we're willing to tolerate. Do we want leaders who prioritize unity over division? Who take responsibility instead of deflecting blame? Who put the country's needs above their own interests? These are questions that mattered then, and they matter now. So, while it's easy to look back at these worst presidents and shake our heads, let's also use their stories as a mirror. What kind of leadership do we want moving forward? Because history has shown us what happens when we get it wrong. And that's a lesson we can't afford to ignore. So, there you have it, our deep dive into some of America's worst presidents. From James Buchanan, catastrophic inaction that helped push the nation towards civil war, to Andrew Johnson's blatant undermining of Reconstruction, to Richard Nixon's Watergate scandal that shattered trust in the presidency, these leaders left a mark on history for all the wrong reasons. We also touched on Herbert Hoover's mishandling of the Great Depression, Franklin Pierce's pro-slavery policies, and even Donald Trump's polarizing and scandal-filled presidency. These presidents remind us that leadership isn't just about power, it's about responsibility, vision, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. Their failures shaped the nation in profound ways, and their stories offer valuable lessons for today and the future. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. And hey, I want to hear from you. Who do you think deserves the title of America's worst president? Was it someone we talked about today, or is there another name that comes to mind? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading them. Now, if you're thinking, okay, but what about the good ones? Don't worry, we've got you covered. Next time, we're flipping the script and exploring America's greatest presidents. Who led the nation through its toughest moments? Who left a legacy of progress and unity? You'll have to stay tuned to find out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.